Hello, this is for ISOL 631 at the University of the Cumberlands. Textbook is Security Policies and Implementation Issues. This is for Chapter 14, IT Security Policy Enforcement. Enforcement of IT security policy begins with the hard work of creating the policy and providing initial security awareness is done. All the effort put into creating the policy is of little value if it's not followed. The compliance program is essential to ensure the policies are adopted and deliver intended value. Quality assurance and quality control reviews, sometimes referred to as compliance reviews, and vulnerability assessments are three important components of a compliance program. The quality assurance review ensures that the security policy is adopted before an action is taken. For instance, ensuring that security is properly coded before a piece of software is moved to production is an illustration of quality assurance. In contrast, quality control reviews and vulnerability assessments are performed after the environment is built. Quality control review determines if policies are being followed. The vulnerability assessment is used to measure the effectiveness of the policies. If everyone follows the policies, then the number of vulnerabilities declines. If the number of vulnerabilities does not decline, the fault lies with either individuals or poorly designed policies. Vulnerability assessment needs to be aligned with business goals. The level of enforcement needs to align with the level of risk. How you implement a compliance program will depend in part on your organization's governance and management culture. This organizational structure defines how a company sets and follows a strategic course. This organizational structure can be leveraged to enforce IT security policies. This chapter reviews the organizational and technical methods of enforcing security policies. We'll discuss the importance of executive support for the enforcement process and discuss specific roles in the organization. This chapter also discusses legal considerations when enforcing security policies. So the learning objective for this chapter is to describe issues related to enforcing ISSM policies. The things we'll cover in this chapter include who is responsible for IT security policy enforcement, what rights an organization has to monitor user actions, how security policies balance legal requirements and risk management, what the difference is between laws and policies, how policies can be enforced manually and automatically, who is legally accountable for IT security policies, and who is ultimately accountable for risks, threats, and vulnerabilities. So the key concepts we will cover are organizational monitoring, enforcement of information security policies, policy enforcement as it relates to compliance laws, and legal implications of information system security policy enforcement. So people. Abuse of a company's technology can leave it at risk. Failure to follow policies could lead to regulatory noncompliance. Failure to follow up and resolve issues can result in lawsuits. These situations can lead to more regulatory sanctions and expensive legal fees. Enforcement of security policies needs to be ingrained in an organization. Many people must participate. Enforcing policies is not a one-person role. Enforcement of policies is achieved through layers. This includes organizational committees enforcing policies and monitoring employees' actions. Each layer validates that security policies are being followed. Goal is to build awareness and enforcement throughout the organization over time. IT security policy compliance is everyone's role. An organization needs to decide what it wants to accomplish through policy enforcement. The organization can choose to focus on a limited number of areas such as access control, data leakage protection, and virus protection. Alternatively, the organization can use policies to enforce change in the culture. Certainly, enforcing security policies changes habits and thus the culture. However, it's important to remember that an organization matures into that state over time. So, governance versus management processes. Enforcement is most effective when it comes from employees' own leadership. Information security teams often do not enforce policies directly. Security teams do not directly manage all employees and thus typically cannot order an employee to comply with policies. So how do security policies get enforced? Usually security teams monitor for compliance, then report non-compliance to leadership. It's then up to leadership to direct employees and ensure the right behavior occurs. This can include disciplinary action up to and including termination in the case of serious violation of security policies. Finding the right level of leadership to take action can be a challenge. It's generally more effective to have leadership, governance, and management committees responsible for IT security policy enforcement. There's a difference between governance and management within an organization. As you see on the image on the screen, you can see the governance sets strategic direction and management executives run day-to-day operations. Governance is defined by COBIT 5, ensures that enterprise objectives are achieved, and directs management to execute. It's these governance processes that balance competing interests such as business need to make a profit and customer need to buy services at a fair price. Governance sets the direction for management to follow. It's then up to management to achieve its goals in alignment with the direction set by the governance processes. Management is responsible for running day-to-day operations. Both operational structures monitor activity. Governance committees are more likely to monitor activity after the fact than in the aggregate to assess whether goals are being achieved. Management committees are likely to monitor activities before, during, and after as part of running the operations. What does this mean for the compliance program? It means that you need to monitor the effectiveness of quality assurance within the management processes. So the various committees. The organization itself is a role in enforcing policies. It's typically handled through gateway committees. These committees are executive management processes to review technology activities. They often provide approvals before a project or activity can proceed to the next stage. This is why they are referred to as gateways. Some organizations combine different functions into one oversight board. Larger organizations often separate committee functions. The names of these committees depend on the organization. Regardless of how these committees are combined or divided, the membership should include senior leaders across the organization. First one is Project Committee. The Project Committee reviews project concepts, designs, and testing phases. It approves when a project can go into production. The number of phases requiring the committee's approval depends on the project life cycle. The intent is to identify project problems early to reduce costly mistakes. This external project review is an ideal time to examine and secure policy issues. Architecture Review Committee promotes standard use of technology and architecture. By creating architecture models to be followed, the organization can more rapidly deploy consistent technology solutions. These models usually have much of the security policies embedded in their design. Consequently, deploying standard sets of technology ensures highly relatable and compliant solutions. The External Connection Committee defines how data is transmitted outside the organization. This includes how data is received. This includes how and what data is sent and received. This committee works closely with the Vendor Governance Committee to make sure no external connections to unauthorized parties are approved. The focus of the committee is the security and reliability of these third-party connections. For organizations with little external connections, these responsibilities may be rolled into other committees, such as the Architecture Review Committee. The Vendor Governance Committee has both a business and a technology role. The business role is the oversight of the vendor relations. This role ensures that vendors deliver on commitments. In other words, this committee ensures all the vendor meets the service level agreement, or SLA, in the contract. The committee also examines concerns about product quality. The technical role of the committee is to ensure that the vendor complies with contract policies. These contracted policies should be at least as restrictive as your own policies. For example, assume your identified security policy requirement to log access to a file. This is to be compliant with a regulation. It's because that file is now transmitted to a vendor to be processed, the security policy requirement for logging doesn't cease to exist. Security Compliance Committee. This typically has many roles. One of the key roles is to determine when policy violations occur. The Security Compliance Committee reviews risk and vulnerability assessments. The committee often focuses on pervasive controls. A pervasive control is a common control that is used across a significant population of systems, applications, and operations. For example, assume the same ID and password can be used across many systems and applications. That control would be considered pervasive in the environment. The Security Compliance Committee role is to ensure that those controls conform to the security policies. The committee may also be a gateway for projects to ensure that controls follow policies. And then the Operation Risk Committee. The Operational Risk Committee, often referred to as Ops Risk, has both a business and technology role. The committee's primary role is to manage risk to the business. The Operation Risk function makes sure the business is operating within risk appetite and risk tolerance. For example, ensuring proper segregation of duties can ensure that some risks are properly controlled. Reasons for monitoring employees. The prevailing legal view is that employers have the right to monitor workers' activities on company computers. The right is not absolute. In other words, it's important that an organization act in accordance with its policies and the law. Policies must be clear and concise. This does not mean you need a policy that creates a right to monitor employees. That right is already written in law. Electronic Communication Privacy Act, or ECPA, gives employers the right to monitor employees in the ordinary course of business. These broad rights include monitoring telephone calls and computer usage, such as email. Having such a policy reduces an employee's argument that he or she has perceived right to privacy. It's always best organizations put in writing their intent to monitor workers' activities on computers. There are a number of good reasons to monitor workers' computer activities. They include maintaining a productive workforce, detecting when security policies are not being followed, maintaining security of sensitive data, ensuring the quality and protecting the organization's reputation, and avoiding liability from pirated intellectual property such as software and music. Employers argue that because the computers are their property, they have the right to have any information contained. This is especially true when policy requires employee notification that computers are for company use only. All files contained in the computer potentially represent a record of the company's business. So primary areas to monitor. There's a little dispute that organizations can monitor employee-owned computers used during work hours through company accounts. There are typically three areas of monitoring employee actions. First one is internet use. Internet use is typically monitored for access to inappropriate sites such as those that contain pornography or obscene material. Access is also monitored for unauthorized access to subscription-only sites. Access to competitor sites or copyrighted material can be monitored. Uploading confidential material is a potential problem. Most recently, concerns have been increased around social network sites. These are sites that build online communities of people who share interests and information. Concern is that workers in these social communities begin exchanging information about the company. This information runs the gamut from entirely innocent remarks to negative commentary on the company, all the way to divulging company secrets. Email use is typically monitored for viruses and malware. Companies also monitor email for data leakage protection and sensitive information. Data leakage protection monitoring may look for large files being emailed outside the organization. You can also scan emails for sensitive information such as account numbers and social security numbers. Email can also be monitored for abusive or threatening language. Company email accounts are difficult to permanently delete. It may be illegal to delete some emails and records that are part of a lawsuit. Once a lawsuit is filed, the expectation is that all records related to the case will be preserved. That includes keeping all emails. For many organizations, this process of identifying such records to keep or not keep is managed by the legal department. The attorney will identify such material and individuals are involved and then direct the technology and security teams to preserve the records in a secure location. This may mean saving individuals' email messages. Additionally, the court may order the retention of emails. For example, in 2012, in the case EEOC versus Original Honey Baked Ham Company, the court ordered broad retention of discovery of text messages and email. The case concerned allegations of sexual harassment, a hostile environment, and retaliation. Computer use. An employee's computer is also monitored for viruses and malware. It's typically monitored for pirated software and excessive use such as game playing. A user's computer is also monitored for unauthorized files that have been removed from secure servers. The extent of the monitoring depends on the concerns of the organization. With the right policies, companies can protect themselves against these risks. There are a few restrictions on monitoring company equipment on a company network. The basic policies that should be in place to allow monitoring to be enforced are transparent and clarity. Basic steps are to make sure you have informed the workers that such monitoring can take place. Be clear through the process that expected behavior is while using the company's computers. So monitoring and enforcement strategies. The information security team should develop a close relationship with the legal team. Teams should communicate their roles and responsibilities to one another. An information security team should review the current legislation that governs their business. The legal department reviews all new or major changes to policies. Enforcement of policies is based on a risk assessment. All policies should be followed. Ensure that consequences of not following policies is properly communicated throughout the organization. and wherever possible, use automated controls to enforce policies. So automated controls. Automating as many security controls as possible is the best way to ensure adoption, enforcement, and effectiveness. By far, this is the preferred approach when possible. Automated controls work the same way every time. That means controls are consistently applied and often executed faster than humans can achieve. Human judgment is expensive and inconsistent. You must train individuals to know what to do. Even then, consistency depends on alert individuals who don't get tired or distracted. Consequently, automated controls are cost-effective for large volumes of work that need to be performed consistently. Another advantage is reporting and monitoring. Automated controls can easily be configured to log and track activity. The same level of data collection performed by a person can be time-consuming and subject to errors. The time component is important. Automated controls tend to be in real time, allowing processes to have self-service capability and reporting instantly. For example, access to low-risk application may be pre-approved. As a result, an individual might be able to go to a self-service site that reviews the request and automatically grants access. With a manual process, a request will have to be submitted to someone to determine whether it is approved. It's not uncommon for a manual process access request to take days or weeks depending on the staffing availability, backlog, application complexity, and the number of approvals required. Automation can significantly reduce the time in the following areas. Appropriate request. Automated controls can validate when the request is complete. It does not violate any policy requirements such as segregation of duties. Approval workflow. Automated controls can route a request to those who must approve it as quickly as possible. Electronic approval is a common practice for many security requests. And implementation. Automated controls can implement a change once it's approved. An automated control is configured into a device to ensure security policy. Here's a short list of several common automated controls. Authentication methods, authorization methods, data encryption, logging events, data segmentation, and network segmentation. The number of automated controls is limited only by the technology's capability. Continued improvement in technology allows for more automation. The biggest challenge isn't the automation, but the deployment. The manual controls. Not all controls can or should be automated. Manual controls are appropriate for low volume work. It's also appropriate for work that requires human judgment. Examples of manual controls are background checks, log reviews, access right reviews, and attestations. Each of these cases, volumes are low and human judgment is important to the process. It's important that manual process be clear. This means that both the step is clear and the criteria for the judgment are clear. Take a look at the background checks as a manual control. This process should be clear as to how to collect information for the background check. The criteria should also be defined. For many jobs, minor traffic violations are acceptable. For other jobs, such as a commercial driver, any traffic violation may be considered unacceptable. A clearly defined security policy ensures everyone is treated equally on background checks. This can avoid legal problems. Human can review logs for unusual activity that is difficult to automate. For example, when a programmer is granted elevated rights to fix a production problem, logs are often reviewed. Logs are reviewed to determine if the programmer performed an activity that exceeded the scope of the fix. For instance, the log review may change if the programmer changed an account data in a database. These types of changes to fix an application may be unusual and require management follow-up. Access rights include a review of the business to ensure adequate separation of duties. This type of review is manual and requires knowledge of how the business operates. Based on this knowledge, a reasonable balance is struck between operational efficiency and reducing risks. And attestation is a formal management verification. Management is attesting that a condition exists. Some regulations require management to attest that security policies and controls are in place. For example, SOX requires this type of attestation from senior management. When someone makes an attestation, they are personally liable for the accuracy of the statement. This is a way the law holds management accountable to ensure appropriate control is put in place. Making a false statement is often a crime. However, making a statement you believe is true that later turns out to be false may be defendable. How defendable depends on the information on which you base the statement. It's not if you knew, but whether you should have known. In other words, simply asking someone if the controls are in place is not sufficient. So, policy enforcement rules. Multiple layers in the organization enforce security policies. Everyone has a role to play to identify and manage risks. The following is a sampling of key roles to enforce security policies. First is the General Counsel, who enforces legally binding agreements. Then the Executive Management implements enterprise risk management. Human Resources enforces the disciplinary actions. Information Systems Security Organization enforces security policies at a program level. And Frontline Manager Supervisor enforces security policies at the employee level. This is not a comprehensive list. For example, the General Counsel works with law enforcement to prosecute employees who violate the law. Key point is to notice that every layer of the organization enforces security policies. Enforcement is not a single team's responsibility. The General Counsel enforces legal binding agreements. This enforcement takes the form of dealing with opposing legal counsel or filing lawsuits on the organization's behalf to resolve contract disputes. This includes agreements with vendors and outsourcers. The legal department is involved when the contract is first written. These contracts often define the security policy to be followed. Ideally, any concerns with these contract policies are quickly resolved without involving the legal department. However, when security policy issues cannot be resolved, then the legal department is called. Legal department can either enforce the contract or terminate it. In extreme cases, the department may file a lawsuit to recover damage due to breach of contract. Regardless of the remedy, ultimate enforcement of legal provisions falls to the legal department. Beyond this role, General Counsel provides legal advice to management on writing and enforcing policies internally. Executive management often focuses on implementing enterprise risk management. The executive committees exist in many organizations. The executive committees bring multiple lines of business together to resolve strategic business issues. This is also true for enterprise risk management. The approval and enforcement of security policies is an executive management responsibility. When two or more executives have differing views on security policies, the CISO, or Chief Information Security Officer, tries to facilitate a solution. When the solution cannot be found, often the issue is brought to an executive management through the Executive Management Committee. It is this committee's role to enforce security policies at the enterprise and executive level. Human resources is a key player in the enforcement of policy actions. The human resource area defines the processes to discipline employees. These processes are one tool for enforcing security policies. The discipline could be a simple coaching session or a formal warning. Many human resource teams have specific guidelines to be followed. This ensures security violations are handled in a consistent and fair manner. Visibility of fair process is important in encouraging appropriate behavior. The Information Systems Security Organization enforces security policies at a program level. The team is accountable for identifying violations of policies. It also needs to bring violations to the attention of management. Keep in mind that employees do not report to the security staff. Employees receive direction from their own management. The security staff is not a corporate policeman enforcing policies as corporate law. This perception is exactly what a security team should avoid. Security team report risks. They also report facts on incidents. It is the employee's management that takes the appropriate action. The frontline manager, supervisor ensures security policies at employee level. These individuals represent the employee's chain of command. It's these individuals that are responsible for employees' day-to-day work. This includes ensuring that employees follow policy. So in summary, the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, owns the information protection program for the organization. She or he must monitor the adoption and effectiveness of the security policies. The Chief Information Security Officer must ensure that non-compliance is escalated to senior management for enforcement. Still, it's everyone's responsibility to enforce security policies. This is accomplished by the collective action of leaders. Enforcement starts with executive support. This support goes beyond granting permission to implement security policies. Executive support also means personal commitment by managers to use their position and skills to influence the direction of their teams. Once executives put their own credibility behind policies, they are less likely to allow violations to occur. The organization also enforces policies through committees. These committees act as a gateway to check the security policies are being followed. This may mean monitoring employee use of the computer. When behavior does not conform to policies, it is the role of frontline managers and supervisors to act. This chapter examined the relationship between organizational layers, governance and management, laws, regulations, and policies, define what is law and policy, examined different methods of enforcing policies, examined the strengths and weaknesses of automated and manual controls. Finally, this chapter examined the legal implications of enforcing security policies. Thank you.